Welcome back to the arena for the latest installment of Battle of the Liveries. I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time to vote in the previous 3 video polls, and for joining me once again as we continue our journey back in time. In this week's video we'll be taking a recap of the voting results from the 90s, before taking a look at the teams and liveries from the 1980s. The poll is currently active in the comments section, so be sure to upvote all of your favourite liveries from this time frame to ensure they progress to the next round. Without further ado, let's now take a look at how the teams fared statistically during the 1990s. Starting off once again with Ferrari, whose popularity seems to coincide mostly with the team's success, as the 2 liveries which polled the largest amount of votes here were the team's near championship winning car of 1990, as well as the team's 1999 edition. Tyrrell received a lot of appreciation for its 1990 livery, with the car made famous by a young John Lacey, just pipping other cars from the decade, such as the 1992 Braun livery, as well as the Nokia liveries, seen in 1995. There was also a good show of support for the debuting BAR team, with its radical 2-in-1 team livery. As expected, there was lots of admiration for the Cannon Williams cars of the early 90s, with the championship winning car of 1992 proving to be the fans' ultimate choice. As the team moved into the mid-decade, we see another influx of votes for the team's Rothmans liveries, before a bit of a dip emerges with the arrival of Winfield. Not all that much support for Brabham's blue and white liveries from this time, though the team's big change-up in 1992 proved to be a popular one, with the majority of the votes going to the blue and pink livery from this year. Likewise, Footwork's efforts from the early to mid-90s haven't polled all too well, though the team would finish off the decade in style, with all 3 of the team liveries from the TWR era polling well, with the unanimous victor being the team's Repsol livery from 1999. We have a big show of support for the 1990 Camel Lotus. However, it would seem that the team's return to green and yellow in its final years didn't resonate with too many of you out there. The black Acela livery from 1990 proves to be a more popular choice than the 3 liveries produced by Team Fond Metal. On to March now, and it's clear that the team's Leighton House sponsored liveries are a popular choice, with the 1990 livery polling the highest. Most fans would also agree that the livery lost a bit of its magic with the departure of Leighton House. A rather popular decade all round for Benetton, with the team's adventurous Mild 7 sponsored liveries from the mid-90s proving themselves to be the pick of the bunch, in the end scoring a healthy amount of votes more than the team's Camel liveries. The 1993 Chesterfield livery proves to be the most popular Scuderia Italia livery from this decade, with the team's car from its final year scoring noticeably more than the team's plain red cars seen up until 1992. In a result that was a bit of a surprise to me, Minardi has had something of a lean decade. It would seem that most fans appreciated the team's classic liveries, particularly from 1990 and 1991, over the various liveries the team ran from the mid-90s onwards. Ligier has also had a bit of a quiet decade, with most fans appreciating the change to Gaulois and an overall darker colour scheme over its liveries from the early decade. This tendency also carries on with Prost, with the 1999 car proving to be the most revered. Once again, success on track has been mirrored here in the vote, with the Marlboro McLarens from the early part of the decade trumping those from the mid-90s. However, it's McLaren's change to West, which has proven to be the big winner here, in particular the team's all-conquering 1998 car. Taking the honours for LaRousse is its red, white and green livery from 1994, with the team's Kronenborg theme gathering more than double the votes of the team's Tortel livery from the same year, and the most popular of the team's navy blue liveries. Time for a side-by-side look at the smaller teams from the early 90s, and some of the more popular choices here were the white, red and green Coloni Subaru car of 1990, the Monteverdi-sponsored Onyx of 1990, the all-black Andrea Moda, as well as the sky blue livery ran by AGS in 1991. Popularity in spades for Jordan during the decade, and it's no surprise to see the colourful Jordan cars of the 90s polling well. The team's 7-Up livery from 1991 scores an insane amount of votes, whilst the team's 1998 and 1999 cars also break the 100 vote mark, as the Hornet proves to be a more widely accepted choice than the Snake. A fairly even spread of votes for Sauber during the 1990s, with the winner here being the team's debut livery from 1993, which only just beats out the 1994 and 1995 liveries. A rather large swell of support shown for Simtek, with the team's livery from its debut season drawing particularly well. Pacific's silver livery from 1994 gets the jump over its 1995 livery, whilst we have a mostly even disbursement of votes for 40. Another big surprise here is the popularity of the MasterCard Lola team, with a lot of love pouring in for this very rare livery. Finally onto Stewart, which has had a decent turnout. The team received an even spread of votes for its tartan liveries. Time now for a look at the leaderboard, and it's an all-Jordan podium, with the ever-colourful Irish team locking out the top 3 spots. There wasn't another team in sight able to match Jordan's green 7-Up livery, which breezes through to the next round. However, we'll be skipping over the 2 Benson and Hedges Jordans from the late 90s, but will be omitted due to the fact that the 2000 Jordan, another of the team's Hornet-themed liveries, actually polled higher than either one of these 2 cars. This means the remaining 4 cars to be penciled in for the next round are the 1992 Cannon Williams, the 1998 West McLaren, the 1990 Ferrari, as well as the 1994 Mild 7 Benetton. Of course, there is a chance this verdict may be retconned following the current vote, as Williams ran with Cannon for a considerable part of the 80s, whilst Ferrari's 1990 car shares a lot in common with its cars from the late 1980s. So there's still a chance for teams such as Simtech and Leighton House March, depending on how things shape up in the 1980s poll. Also keep in mind that I will be throwing in a couple of wildcard entrants before the beginning of the round of 32, so this insanely close battle between the top cars of the 90s may not be over just yet. And with all of that being said, it's time to once again preview the teams for the time frame in question, this time the teams of the 1980s. Ferrari would spend the duration of the decade in association with Agip, which saw the team's classic red livery receiving accentuations of yellow and black. In 1983, Ferrari once again became Constructors' Champions, and began colouring its front and rear wings black, with Goodyear on display, whilst in 1984 Marlboro first became a team sponsor. The team would carry on with this look throughout the rest of the decade. Tyrrell began the 1980s in association with Candy, with Candy's red, green and white colours coming together with Tyrrell's recognised blue scheme. The team would shuffle between a blue and white livery throughout the 1981 season. In 1982, Tyrrell raced on with its blue livery before signing with Denim and running with a chiefly navy green livery. Tyrrell would take on a green and black livery in 1983, receiving sponsorship from Benetton, before going on to race with 4 different liveries for the 1984 season, with the team's classic blue livery seen alongside liveries inspired by the British and German flags, as well as a primarily maroon livery sponsored by Yardley Gold. 1985 saw a return to blue, whilst the following 2 seasons saw Tyrrell racing in a black and white livery, as Data General became titular sponsors. In 1988, Camel signed with the team, seen on a black livery, and subsequently a blue livery in 1989. Brabham raced throughout the decade draped in blue and white, with Parmalat taking on the role of the team's title sponsor up until 1984. The team would take on BMW engines in 1982, racing with BMW up until 1987, upon which time the team took a 1-year hiatus, whilst ownership of the team changed hands. With the team's return in 1989 came a reprisal of the team's blue and white livery. Marlboro McLaren was an unfaltering presence throughout the entirety of the 1980s, as the team enjoyed its most successful decade in the sport, collecting drivers and constructors trophies with tag Porsche engines in 1984 and 1985, before notching up another back-to-back championship sweep in 1988 and 1989 with Honda engines. The German ATS team competed in Formula 1 until 1984 with its yellow and black company colour scheme, initially employing yellow as its primary colour, before switching to a black base for the 1983 and 1984 seasons. Lotus would begin the decade racing with Essex as its primary sponsor, adopting a navy blue, red and chrome silver livery for 1980 and the beginning of 1981. The midpoint of the 1981 season would see the team returning to its black and gold JPS colour scheme, with Essex seen on the side pots. From 1982 until 1986, the team would run with its black and gold JPS colour scheme in full, before a change in title sponsors saw the team livery recoloured yellow with navy blue text in deference to Camel. Ensign was seen in Formula 1 during 1980 and 1981, racing with its recognised red, white and blue colour combination. This was to change in the team's final season of Formula 1 activity in 1982, when the team signed on Café de Colombia and raced with a black and white livery, as well as a blue and white livery. The original factory Renault team was seen on track during the 1980s in nothing but its classic yellow and black livery, often adding white to the mix, constantly evolving its livery design on a season-by-season basis, and racing in association with fuel suppliers Elf until its departure from the sport in 1985. Shadow competed in its final Formula 1 season in 1980 with an all-black livery, before being taken over by the returning Theodore Racing, which saw the team run with a white livery that featured red text. Theodore would continue racing with this livery up until 1983, when it changed to a black and white Segafredo Zanetti livery. From 1980 until 1981, Fittipaldi raced in an all-yellow livery that promoted title sponsors Skoll. Fittipaldi would return to Formula 1 for the final time in 1982, racing with a red, white and blue colour scheme. In 1980, Alfa Romeo signed a deal with Philip Morris Tobacco, which saw a second Marlboro-themed livery join the F1 grid. Alfa Romeo would run with Marlboro branding up until 1985, when it took on the green company colour of knitwear brand Benetton. Over the course of the decade, the French national racing colour would remain a feature of the Ligier team livery, as would title sponsors Gitane, which was seen on the car alongside the colours of the French flag, first introduced by additional sponsors Talbot, which joined in 1981, as well as Lotto, which joined in 1984, and Candy in 1985. Williams entered the decade competing in its white and navy green livery, sponsored by Albelad and Saudia, collecting back-to-back constructors' mantles in 1980 and 1981. ICI began featuring prominently on the team livery in 1984, adding their company colour of yellow. In 1985, Canon became title sponsors, as Williams transitioned to a blue, white and yellow identity, going on to secure a further 2 constructors' titles in 1986 and 1987 with Honda Power. In 1980, Arrows competed in the last of its gold Warsteiner liveries, introducing an all-orange livery in 1981, sponsored by Ragno and Beta Tools. This livery was seen up until 1982, and in 1983 Arrows raced initially with a primarily white livery, before signing with Barclay, which saw Arrows adopt the colours of the British cigarette brand. Arrows would continue to race with Barclay branding up until 1987, when it switched to a white, crimson and blue livery, brought on by new title sponsors USF&G, and would retain this colour combination until the end of the decade. Osella would make its Formula 1 debut in 1980, competing in its first 3 seasons with a blue and white livery sponsored by Denim. In 1983, the team changed to a light blue livery that featured additions of yellow and grey, as well as Kalamata sponsorship. The team would retain this colour scheme until 1988, when it adopted a black and yellow design, before tweaking the livery mid-season, adding white to the livery, as well as diagonal stripes. 1989 would see the beginning of Osella's relationship with Fond Metal, which saw the team change to a white livery that featured the orange and red of Fond Metal. The Ram Formula 1 team competed in 1980 with a white livery, which attracted sponsorship from Rainbow Jeans. In 1981, Ram was contracted to run the March Formula 1 concern, running with a black livery that featured Guinness sponsorship. 1982 saw the team taking to the track with Rothman sponsorship, which saw the team decked out in white, blue, red and gold. The team would also field a third car in 1982, which was painted black and sponsored by LBT. In 1983, the team broke away from March, running with a white livery, accented with blue, red and green. The team would then race in its final 2 seasons with Skoal Bandit as its title sponsor, and a livery that met white with navy green. Tolman emerged on the Formula 1 stage in 1981, racing in its first 4 seasons in the colours of title sponsors Candy. During the 1984 season, the team would unveil a primarily white livery, before a change to Benetton sponsorship saw the team adding flags from around the world to its livery in 1985. In 1986, Benetton took control of the team, reverting to its company colour of green and a multicoloured brushwork theme that also featured on occasion multicoloured tyres. Benetton would spend the rest of the decade racing in combinations of green, yellow, red and blue. In 1983, Spirit entered Formula 1, running with Honda engines and a red, white and blue livery. This was the case until 1985, when it ran with an all-white livery, before once again returning to its original colour scheme. Minardi debuted in Formula 1 in 1985, introducing its colour scheme of dark blue and yellow and a close connection with local Italian sponsors. In 1989, the team would add white to its colour palette and also introduced a diagonal theme. Another team to enter F1 in 1985 was Zakspeed, which spent the entirety of its Formula 1 tenure with a red and white livery featuring gold trim, courtesy of West. Haas would also debut in Formula 1 in 1985, carrying Beatrice sponsorship upon a red, white and blue livery. This design was retained in 1986. AGS first appeared in Formula 1 in 1986, competing until 1987 dressed in white and sponsored by Charo. In 1988, the team reverted to a navy blue and orange livery design, which carried on into 1989. March would return to the Formula 1 stage in 1987, sporting a cyan livery with sponsorship from Leighton House and later BP, which joined as fuel suppliers in 1989. LaRousse was to emerge in Formula 1 the same year, seen on track with a navy blue, red, yellow and green colour combination. Another team to debut in Formula 1 in 1987 was Coloni, which initially competed in canary yellow, before adopting green and blue to its livery in 1989, and changing its scheme once again midway through the season, to a white, navy blue, light blue and yellow arrangement. 3 more teams would join the grid in 1988, the first of which being Real, which fielded a blue livery, and went on to add light blue to its design in 1989. Scuderia Italia, which competed in the Italian national racing colour, and Eurobrun, which initially took to the track in a white livery featuring red wheels, before changing to a white, yellow and black livery midway through the season. In 1989, Eurobrunn returned with an orange Jägermeister-sponsored livery. And finally, Onyx was seen on track in 1989 with its blue, white and pink livery, which featured sponsorship from Moneytron. And with each team having been covered, to cast an official vote, simply upvote the livery you want to see make it through to the next round. There is no limit to how many times you can vote, so feel free to upvote all of your favourite cars from this time frame and leave a comment sharing your thoughts on the liveries from the 1990s. Until next Monday, F1 fans, happy voting.